Hey, Julian here. If you're a regular listener, you might remember a story that we did last year about scammer farms. Most scams these days, they're being run by people living in slavery from these so-called scammer farms, and it's a pretty scary, bleak situation. So we've launched a new multi-part documentary series called Scammerland. You're going to hear some stories of people who have been abducted into this system and then escaped. And then we're going to really unpack how this business model got started, who runs it, and who is trying to stop it. It's on Apple Podcasts, but it's also on YouTube and Spotify if you'd like to watch the video version. That's Scammerland, out now.
Forever change the way you sleep with the softest 100% organic cotton bedding from Boll & Branch. You'll fall asleep faster, wrapped in the most luxurious comfort. You'll never sleep hot again with blankets, duvets, and sheets that feel breathable to sleep in. You'll experience pure comfort on night one and feel your bedding get softer with every wash. Take 20% off your first order during Boll & Branch's annual spring event at bollandbranch.com with code BUTTERY. Limited time only. Exclusions apply. See site for details.
Hey, Prime members, are you tired of ads interfering with your favorite podcasts? Good news! With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free podcasts. That's amazon.com/ad-free podcasts to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Hey, I'm Julian Morgans, and you're listening to What It Was Like, the show that asks people who have lived through big, dramatic events what it was like. Every now and then, I find myself wishing that I lived a few hundred years ago. You know, just give up all of the modern conveniences like Netflix and butter chicken and antibiotics, because there's something really great that they used to have in the past that's becoming a bit rare these days. And that's wilderness. You know, wilderness. I'm talking about the places that have been wild for thousands of years. Forests, oceans, islands. And I think the notion, the concept of wilderness is important to me because I just like to know that whatever happens, there are still places that aren't touched by all the nonsense. You know, spots that are real and they're somehow connected to a higher power than just like stuff on the internet and GDP and just modernity. I think it's why I find this concept of wilderness so alluring, but also so fascinating. And I think this fascination extends to uncontacted tribes. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, uncontacted tribes are groups of indigenous people that haven't joined modernity. They live without sustained contact with the outside world, just as they have for thousands of years. And I love the way that, if you think about it, most people lived in uncontacted tribes for most of human history. It really wasn't until colonialism in the 16th and 17th and 18th centuries that the world was dragged into this era of connectedness. And now, I mean, like 2025, everyone's on the grid. You can literally look up a third of the world's population, 3 billion people on Facebook. But despite this, despite all of this connectedness, there are still a few remnant pockets of the pre-modern world. It's estimated that there are between 100 and 200 uncontacted tribes left around the world, with most of them living in South America, especially in northern Brazil, where between 70 to 80 tribes are believed to live in the Amazon. But I wanted to speak with someone who has interacted with one of these tribes, and not just once, but several times. And that brought me to Justin Rawlat, who is a BBC journalist. And Justin has spent a significant amount of time with the Owa people, who are an uncontacted tribe in Brazil. And Justin is going to share his insights on how this tribe is navigating modern pressures while also holding on to their traditional ways of life. But he's also going to share some bigger observations about humanity in general. What happens when two people from vastly different worlds meet, and what that highlights about our common humanity. It's big stuff, so let's get into it. Here is Justin Rohlert. Justin, welcome to the show.
Cheers, Julian. It's very kind of you to invite me on.
It's so exciting that you're on. It's really exciting. So I'm talking to you about uncontacted tribes in the Amazon. You are coming to me from London right now. So how did you find yourself in this world?
I'm a BBC correspondent. I've been a BBC correspondent for many years. I used to work on a high-profile BBC programme called Newsnight. I've worked on loads of different programs across the BBC, but by hook or by crook, I managed to get invited by my BBC bosses on, frankly, what has to be one of the, in England, we'd say the jammiest, one of the luckiest kind of offers, a two-part, 1-hour documentary series for the BBC about the rise of China around the world. And one of our stops was in Brazil. The Brazilians opened their economy up to Chinese imports, and big economies like China, it's true of lots of economies around the world, is for kind of wood and other potentially forest products. And so we then went to look at this, went to visit this tribe, newly contacted. People used to say discovered. Obviously, there's no discovery here. They knew they were there. I went in 2010, and they'd been contacted about 15 years beforehand. So when I say contacted, what I mean is that the first interactions between them and kind of outsiders, people who didn't live in the forest, were made. First formal ones. I mean, obviously they could see kind of planes fly overhead. They'd hear noises. People would come through the forest. They'd hear things like chainsaws, for example. They talked about as kids hearing the chainsaws and their parents gathering them up and then moving on to get away from these invaders, they call them, in the forest. But yeah, these were people who lived completely separate from the modern world until 15 years before I turned up. So, I mean, I have to say it felt like an extraordinary privilege going to visit them.
Yeah. So I just want to set you up a bit. So you're a sort of intrepid reporter. You're a sort of man out there in the field. But tell me a bit about yourself. Like, where did you grow up? How did you get into this?
So I grew up in North London, very urban environment. Went to a local kind of state school, did okay in my exams, went to university, always wanted to be a journalist. I mean, to be honest, struggled very hard. It was very hard to break into journalism. And it took me quite a few years to manage to actually do it. But I mean, I'm thoroughly urban. My family for generations have lived in cities. This is for me, a very, very alien environment. I'd never been deep into the forest before, into any rainforest before. So this was a proper adventure for me.
Okay. And I'm just, I guess I'm curious, like your motivation here. Do you see yourself as kind of like an adventurer, or do you see your role here as kind of like, shining a light on undertold stories and marginalized people? I mean, like, what is your sort of personal motivation in this?
I'm definitely not. I like the idea of being an adventurer. Like a kind of, some explorer from the Victorian era. No, I'm a journalist, and I see my job as kind of reporting the facts of what's happening in the world back to interested audiences who are keen. I see my job as finding ways to tell stories in engaging ways to draw kind of, things that significant or important changes in the world. And our objective was, wasn't about, seeing these people because they were some kind of curiosity. We were telling another story about the incredible reach and penetration that the Chinese economy was having globally, and reporting some of those impacts. So obviously, there've been uncontacted people for the last couple of centuries that have been, displaced and affected by the rise of other economies, the so-called developed world. So Britain obviously was at the forefront of that for many years as an imperial nation. And then, of course, America and the rest of the developing nations. All of our economies have tendrils that go out deep into remote areas. So this is not exceptional to China, but in this case, we were looking at how China was, driving change around the world.
Yeah, I think you just touched on something there that draws me to this topic. This notion that for a long time, humanity was by and large tribal. Villages that were isolated, that was the norm, not particularly unique. And now, as post-industrial revolution, we've just run out of people who live like this.
These people weren't, they were hunter-gatherers, so they didn't live in village communities. The village the village they live in now, is a kind of artificial construct. And it was only when the area of forest became so compromised, got so much smaller, they couldn't practice, because you need a huge area of forest to be a hunter-gatherer, because you move on, you kind of deplete the resources, you catch the animals in one place, or pick the berries and eat the fruits or whatever, and then you move on somewhere else. And, you need to cover a huge area to allow everything to regenerate. And it stopped being possible for the Awa people, the tribes called the Awa, AWA. It stopped being possible for the Awa people, So these were people who lived they lived before the agricultural revolution. They lived in the kind of conditions, Julian, that you and I would have lived with, maybe, 10,000 years ago. I mean, a long time ago that the, settled communities of kind of Europe and the Middle East, started developing agriculture. So this is it is the traditional kind of human lifestyle, for what we've been around for 300,000 years. So for 290,000 years, we would have lived like these people. The agricultural revolution, the way we live now, is the kind of weird exception in terms of our experience as a species.
Yeah, and I find that fascinating. It's a sort of a time capsule of humanity on a global level, but in these little isolated pockets, just little time capsule here in Papua New Guinea, time capsule in Brazil, So off the back of that, can you give me a little bit of context just give me a sense of the geography? Like what's the sort of area that we're talking about here?
So this is the eastern Amazon. I mean, it's now the furthest reach. I mean, we can come on to this, but there isn't a great deal of forest left in the area these people are. It's a state called Maranhão. I think that's how you pronounce it. So it's now a largely agricultural state. But even that's changed so much, even since I was there in the last 15 years. There's been a huge deforestation kind of effort. So, even when I went there was considerably more forest. So it's on the eastern side of the Amazon. Was once, fairly recently, 50 years ago, was probably fully forested. Now is, as I say, really depleted. And these Survival International, which is a charity that works with tribal people, tries to support tribal people, has listed the Awa as the most threatened tribe in the world. So these were people living precariously at the kind of edge of their traditional lifestyles.
Got it. Just off the top of your head, how many of these sort of tribes are left?
I don't know how many tribes there are in the world. Not many. I mean, they're getting fewer and fewer. So there are about, I think, 350 Awa people. And when I was there was still a couple of small groups of uncontacted people who were relatives of, they didn't necessarily have contact with them, but they were relatives to the people that I went to see in this village environment that they'd moved into. But there were still some people living wild in the forest. Probably only about 10. Elsewhere, there are a few uncontacted tribes, 5 or 6, I think. I think it's only now in the Amazon that there are some. And these are people who are kind of deliberately hostile, who have clearly decided they don't want to have contact and will kind of, run away. But if pressed, and have been known to kind of fire arrows at people who've tried to approach them. But, you think of the human influence in the Amazon gets more and more extensive. People build pathways and roads. And as I think I said, the Awa would hear the sound of chain forests, across the valley kind of thing as they were moving through their forest. And the same things happen to these people. They can look up through the tree canopy, see airplanes fly overhead. They know that there is something else going on, but there's very few. I think it literally is 4 or 5 tribes have decided they really don't want any contact. And Brazil has been, depending what the government's like, has been quite respectful of tribes' rights. And there is very much a policy that they won't force contact on people. But I have to say, there was a massive bureaucracy, and still is, to go and see the hour. You have to apply to the Indigenous Peoples Organisation, FUNAI. You have to explain what you're doing. You have to kind of agree not to disrupt their lifestyle, which we'll come on to, because they have some quite interesting, attitudes very different from ours to property, for example. And you've got to be very careful about that. So there is quite a lot of protection around them.
Okay. So can you set up the day that you got there, and how did it feel? What did it look like?
So we arrived in, so this is 2010, and we actually, there is a road in, but when I say a road, there's a rough forest path. We came in by boat. Traditionally in the Amazon you travel on the rivers because they're the easiest way to get through the forest. We came in through, and they'd all come down to meet me by the river. There was a little kind of landing stage on the river, and they'd all come down to meet me. And there was this, it was weird. They were, well, I tell you what, the weirdest thing was, I've been to lots of countries around the world, and I've found some of them culturally quite hard to handle. And I was worried that meeting people who'd lived such different lives would be a kind of challenge, that whether there'd be a sense of shared humanity. But right from the beginning, they seemed to think that I was really, really funny for some reason. Really? There was a lot of laughter. They were very kind of relaxed, but they were, I'd kind of stumble on a tree root and they would think it was just hilarious. They were, it was like, I remember at the time saying it was like, I felt like Mr. Bean, I'd kind of gone into the forest, and in my head, I'm a kind of, this kind of Bruce Parry style adventure in the forest, and they just obviously thought that I was a complete, I'd reach out to touch a fruit and it would be covered in spikes, and I'd like that, and they honestly thought I was really funny. And one of the really, it was almost like they were sort of winding me up, that whole, writers always talk about it, when you go somewhere and they offer you food and it's kind of disgusting, and you out of duty you eat it and you say how lovely it is, and everybody says, oh yeah, and then you're kind of, and it's like a kind of rite of passage.
Well, trope.
There was a very similar thing happened with the hour. They produced this lightly grilled monkey that they cooked. It was, I can't tell you how it was cold for a start, right? So it hadn't just come off the barbie. This was a grilled small monkey. It had its teeth and lips. I remember seeing eyelashes. This thing had eyelashes, right? And it was sort of singed and charred. It wasn't even well cooked. And the guy took a bit of meat off the shoulder. You could see a little bit of kind of monkey shoulder bone poking through, and ate it. Still had a bit of hair on it and skin. And then under the skin, you could see this kind of sort of hard white fat, and then some sort of, it was really, and it smelled just a little funky, like it was just
very
on the tan.
gamey.
They cooked the monkey 2 days ago and left it on a shelf. And he ate a bit of it. Then he was like, no, you eat it. And they were all standing round watching expectantly. And I was like, oh God, really? Do I have to? So I took a tiny bit of monkey and kind of, and I was sort of, it really was disgusting, seriously, Julian. So I was kind of gagging slightly, and they were doubled over with laughter. And at the end, I was like, it was almost like they knew this convention that the visitor has to eat food. And it felt as if they deliberately chose, what is the rankest thing we have here? Let's make him eat that. The other thing they actually did it, I'm glad to say, to the producer. One of the things we did, we wanted to show their traditional hunting behaviour. So we went on a hunt, which I think we'll talk about later. But we went out on a hunt, and they, they'd actually caught beforehand, but they'd caught a tortoise, and they had a porcupine, and they grilled these on a fire, and then they were eating them. And they plucked out, and they were obviously pretending that this was the most delicious bit of the tortoise, and gave it to Steve. I'm glad to say they were having a go at all of us. Gave it to Steve, and he was sort of chewing it. It was a tiny bit of meat, and then like a little bit of muscly gristle. And he pulled it out, and he realised it was the tortoise's anus.
Oh, no.
That they'd given him. No, and I can't believe that it's the most delicious. But it was, it was like they kind of knew what they were doing. They knew it. They were eating all the lovely tender meat, and they were giving us these awful scraps, and then they were delighted when we would kind of go. They. So you felt this kind of this equality. Not just of, they weren't treating me with any respect. No. They were just enjoying. It was like a real sense they were enjoying. I mean, obviously, I was really enjoying being in this amazing community and seeing these people living in the way that they did. But equally, they were enjoying it just as much, getting as much from it. They weren't in awe or kind of, anything of me. They just saw me as another this really amusing idiot who'd come into the forest and clearly, didn't know how to handle himself. If you left him on his own, he'd probably die in a day. I think they thought it was, I think they, if anything, they felt a kind of, quite rightly, a sense of superiority.
Yeah.
I'd come to their environment, they understood it, I didn't. So I was the kind of naive innocent, and it was a kind of reversal of what I'd expected.
Yes.
And in a way, I thought that was, I just thought it was great because, obviously there's often a lot of kind of veneration and we talk about tribal people and respect their traditional ways and stuff. And they didn't have any of that kind of pomposity. There was none of that. It was just it was a really kind of meeting. It felt like a real meeting of equals.
Hey, we're just going to stop here for a quick ad break, but stick around. We'll be right back with more What It Was Like.
Hey, Prime members, are you tired of ads interfering with your favorite podcasts? Good news. With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free podcasts. That's amazon.com/ad-free podcasts to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Worried about what ingredients are hiding in your groceries? Let us take the guesswork out. We're Thrive Market, the online grocery store with the highest quality standards in the industry. We restrict 1,000 plus ingredients, so you can trust that you'll only find the best high-quality, organic, and sustainable brands, all free of the junk. With savings up to 30% off and fast carbon-neutral shipping, you get top trusted groceries at your door, and you can stop worrying about what your kids get their hands on. Start shopping at thrivemarket.com/podcast for 30% off your first order and a free gift.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Hi there, it's your vagina speaking. I know sometimes I have a hard time getting there when we get down, but OMG Cream from Wisp is here to help. The instant arousal makes it easier to, shh. It takes 2 minutes to order online, so let's give it a try. OMG. I literally just went to heaven. I'm gonna try that again. Go tell your friends though, get on Wisp. Order OMG Cream online at hellowisp.com. That's hello, WISP.com, and have it delivered for free. Use code OMG for 15% off your first order.
It's so true what you're saying. Like, people listening to this would really expect some kind of, poignant sort of like moment that sort of just transcends mere kind of, also it's either that or it's like, oh, this sort of white savior complex. And instead you're this bumbling guy around in the forest and they're just pranking you. Like it's, they were really, you're not the savior in this.
You kind of imagine they were going to tell you what, get that monkey. Let's see what happens if we feed him that monkey. That monkey had us. There was definitely felt like that. But there were some quite interesting things because so one of them, Pirayi, who was he wasn't the leader, but he was a kind of a big character in the tribe, a young man, good-looking young man, and he wanted my torch, and I hadn't really thought about any of that, so I was kind of going to give it to him. And then the guy from the Indigenous Peoples Organization kind of took me aside and he said, look, you can't give them anything. And I'm like, that's a bit mean. Why not? We've got all this nice stuff. And why shouldn't we? They've hosted us. It would be traditional to. And he said, look, they don't have a sense of property. Property isn't a concept in a traditional hunter-gatherer community. So you've got some shared things, like you'd have a bow and arrow, and you might keep a bow and arrow with you. It doesn't actually belong to you. It belongs to the tribe. And the same for the kind of, knives and stuff you might use to cut meat, and, the wherewithal for making hammocks, whatever it is. So they don't have stuff they own. So to give somebody something really nice, like a lovely LED torch or something, not that he'd be able to get any batteries for it where he lived, but it would work for a while, was really disruptive, because it would create inequalities and might create jealousy. And it was really because you just thought, actually, how pernicious property is. Suddenly, he's got a torch and I haven't got a torch. Hold on a second. I want a torch, and you could see how quickly that kind of communal agreement of sharing could break down in the face of, we had, you turn up, especially when you were with a film crew, you turn up with these huge bags spilling with kind of electronics and clothes and, toothbrushes and weird kind of, snacks that you've brought and stuff, all of it. And it's something I looked on all this kind of bounty, and you're like, oh my God, it's gross.
Yeah.
They've got, all of this, my stuff, don't touch my stuff. That's my hat. You can't wear that. And it just makes you kind of, and then but also that the fragility of how fragile that respect, according to, to say, well, we're all going to just share stuff, and how easy it would be to break down. And I went back 4 years later. Already you could see the community was changing, that they had things like chairs. Everybody was wearing kind of Western clothes.
What were they wearing? What did they look like when you first met them?
Well, they were wearing, to be honest, they would sort of day to day for going around the village. They would wear shorts and some T-shirts and that kind of stuff. So it kind of looked like the sort of stuff that might have been, given to a charity and shipped out to Brazil. But when we went on our hunting trip, they were wearing their slightly startling traditional attire, which consisted of, you and I would probably say they were entirely naked, but in their minds they were dressed. So they had a little bit of string with a beautiful red feather, presumably for some jungle bird, tied to their foreskin, and that was it. Bare feet, nothing else. Some of them had, I think a couple of them had straps tied to their biceps, like kind of a leather strap, but nothing else apart from the fully dressed with the string on the foreskin. That was it. And obviously there was a joke. Again, they thought it was hilarious. They walked out, and there was a sort of reveal. The producer, Steve, obviously knew what was happening, but I'd been kept in the dark. So he said, "Oh, they're gonna come out, and you'll go on your hunt in a moment." Well, so I was kind of facing one way, and there was a sort of reveal where I turned around and discovered how they were, and I was like, "Steve, mate, I'm not going to dress like that." And he was, but they, again, it wasn't like they were teasing me. They were laughing. They understood that for me it would be naked, right? When you think about what the difference is, they felt dressed, but they knew that for me that would be sort of shocking and different and naked. They understood that it was different for me. And again, showing their kind of, that they were really kind of, they understood the cultural differences exactly like we did, and they thought it was really funny. They thought it was really funny that I thought it was slightly shocking the way they were dressed. So it was, again, it was a meeting of kind of equals. They were sort of playing a game with me as much as frankly Steve was playing a game with me. They were definitely on Steve's side, not mine. I've got to say that.
You guys were shooting a documentary. You had all this camera equipment with you. What was their perception of your mystical ability to record time and play it back?
I don't remember them really being that interested in that side of things. And there certainly wasn't any of this capture my spirit stuff. They didn't mind at all. I imagine that people had come with cameras before to sort of document them, kind of anthropologists and stuff. So we probably came after a wave of interested people had come to speak to them. So I think they weren't that curious, and they seemed to understand. I think they understood that, that other people were going to see it, if you know what I mean. Because if you think about it, that's quite a hard concept, that we might be capturing something but I think they knew that we'd come from elsewhere in the world, and we were going to go back and show something about their lifestyles to the people. That I have to say, though, communication was quite difficult. They had a tribal language. I mean, I think it's part of a family of tribal languages, but literally 350 people spoke their kind of dialect. And so we had to have somebody who spoke their dialect, but also spoke Portuguese. I don't speak Portuguese, so I had to then we had to have somebody who could translate from Portuguese to English. So there's quite a long chain to get to communicate with them. So it was quite hard you couldn't immediately get an idea of what they were saying. Although a lot of, like I say, I felt a real affinity. A lot of it you just kind of knew roughly what they were, mostly teasing me, but you knew roughly the kind of thing they were saying, until we started asking them questions about their lives and how, and the impact that, other people were having on them. That obviously became much more complex, and we need obviously full translation for that.
Yeah. Okay. So, I'm curious now, like when you got into that stuff, tell me about your lives. What sort of answers did you receive?
Well, they talked about how their lives had changed, how they'd grown up in the forest. They knew that there were other people out there, but, for a long time, they didn't really disturb them. Because they were covering such a huge area of rainforest, they'd kind of perhaps see a path here, or a campsite of people who'd been through the forest. They'd hear, like I said, the chainsaws and that kind of stuff. So it was on the edges, quite distant, and didn't really interfere with them. But over the years, basically the first thing that happens, a road goes in, hunters come and they, hunt the animals. Then loggers come, they take the really valuable trees first. Then, maybe somebody comes in and takes some of the less valuable trees. Then a farmer comes, cuts the remaining trees down, burns them, typically they'd make grassland, and then bring some cattle on. So that process would take probably 10, 20, 30 years to go through the full cycle. So it took a while as it kind of, as these encroaching kind of settlers nibbled away at their forest reserves. But they said, sometimes they'd been threatened by guns. Sometimes they had shot at people who they thought were threatening, and then they'd come back with more guns. And it was they'd sort of been on the run for quite a few years before formal contact. So it was quite, it's a hard life in the forest, particularly if other people are hunting the animals that you've traditionally, hunted. So life had become harder and harder. And like I say, I think it wasn't, wholly voluntary, their decision finally to kind of agree to make contact. I think it was partly because life had just become, too hard. And they said that a lot of the prized trees, the trees that the loggers want, are the really big kind of old hardwood trees. They said a lot of those have fruits that they eat, and taking those out of the forest disrupts the balance of their survival, because they're hunters and gatherers, so they're gathering fruits and tubers and that stuff like that. So yeah, they said life had got harder and harder. It was they were very cheerful kind of people. There wasn't a sense of. I have visited other tribal people, for example, up in the Arctic, and there wasn't this kind of joyous laughter. They did seem a very happy community. There were young kids running around, and they had pet animals, and they had very simple shelters. That when I first went, just roofs made of palm leaves, and then hammocks hanging, so with no walls, so it was all open. Wow. And everybody was kind of jumbled together, and they seemed very content and happy. Although they had all had trauma, and some of them had seen relatives killed and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, this story, it seems to have a tinge of sadness to me. This is representative of some of the last people living like this. Not just that, but these people, the actual individuals that you were hanging around, they watched as, yes, their relatives were killed by, loggers or poachers or whatever. And then they had to make this decision to abandon their traditional way of life, just simply for the sake of survival. That seems pretty sad to me.
I think, it definitely is sad. I mean, I would say, day to day, their disposition seemed to be to kind of enjoy life and not dwell on it. But yeah, it was sad, and it kind of got sadder because that was when I first saw them, and they were living in these very basic shelters, not even buildings. I went back 4 years later, they were effectively living in houses with, kind of walls covered in plaster and painted. So that's a whole new level of kind of sophistication of settled life. And then we contacted them during COVID, just after COVID in 2021, me and a colleague who'd been on the trips with. I've been to see them twice. So I went in 2010, then I went back in 2014, and then we contacted them in 2021. And in 2021, they said it was like, back like the worst of the old days. They could hear the chainsaws in the forest. The President Bolsonaro, who was kind of felt that he very strongly had a policy that the Amazon needed to be developed for the, represented a huge amount of potential wealth for Brazil. It needed to be developed, and that his government would do everything it can to encourage, they call it development, but obviously that means kind of going out in the forest and cutting the forest down and accessing resources, minerals and stuff that might be under the soil. And they encouraged all of that to happen. And once we've kind of taken the land, there's nothing anyone can do. It's really hard to persuade settlers to move from the land and to regrow forests. So it looked like it was a real assault. As it happens, I'm talking to the Brazilian government to see if we could go back again and see, how they are now. So, and because the new government, President Lula, has massively reduced deforestation, and it looks like they might be in a position to go back and try and drive out settlers from the land. They have a defined, reserve, a tribal reserve of forest that people aren't supposed to go into. But when I went back in 2014, it was because the Brazilian government had this kind of military effort to drive people out of the illegal settlers out of forest reserves. And we actually went in with the army and saw them destroy the buildings of these settlers, and even took Piraí and one of his friends, Mana. They flew in a helicopter. He'd only actually left the village once in his entire life. He'd never, let alone flown in a helicopter. And then the two of them got into the helicopter, and we flew them to they knew where the farming community was, but they didn't go there because it was too dangerous for them. So we landed just imagine for them what this felt like. Landed in the farming community, and there were all these, the farmers had been moved out then, but but all their buildings were there, and they had bulldozers and were just bulldozing the houses with the bulldozers, raising it to the ground, and the idea to let the forest grow back, which it actually does do. It takes decades, but it does. You can recover forests, so that was the idea. Anyway, they flew back. We flew them back to the village, landed in the village, and obviously everybody came to kind of hear. And it was afterwards actually we got the translation, but the translation was brilliant. They were really excited, and they were saying, they've got this machine with an iron claw, and it just tears down all their buildings, and they're going beep 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 as like all the houses going down. And they said, there's no one there. The villages are empty, and they've gone. And the other thing that was really nice, they said, and we saw from the helicopter, because we were so high up, we could see there's more forest. That we saw forest. There's more forest. Everybody was in awe. It was amazing scene to see them relating kind of this news to them. The bad news is, 2021, and that community had reestablished itself. So, I guess the message is that the only way to kind of preserve these communities and these areas of forest is with constant policing.
Yeah.
But let me tell you, there was the kind of apex, the funniest moment of the whole trip, this first trip when we were there in 2010. We'd been on this hunt, and Dave's the cameraman. He's a big guy. He's quite heavy. He was carrying a lot of gear. He was quite slow. Steve had been with him. So I was at the head with we weren't filming at this point. You film the bits you want to film. We can't film everything. So we'd stopped filming. And it was like the day was over. So we were headed back to the village. through the forest. We're kind of walking through it was very hot and sweaty, and your kind of sweat dries, and there are lots of insects that like the salt, so they come and kind of walk on you and lick the salt, so you're kind of, getting a bit itchy. And we got to a bend in the river, and there was this kind of pool in the river, swimming pool in the river, if you like, swimming hollow, whatever you'd call it. And they all jumped in and started swimming. And I swim a lot. I'm a very keen swimmer. So I was like, oh, I wouldn't mind a swim. But and there were none of my colleagues. None of my colleagues were there. So I took my clothes off, all of my clothes off, because I just was like, being practical.
They're naked,
I didn't want to have wet
you get
clothes.
naked. Yeah.
So I just dived in with them, which they I have to say again, they thought it was hilarious. Swimming around. Anyway, there was one of them, I saw him fishing around on the side of the bank. And then he came up to me and he was sort of reaching for my genitals. Yeah. And he had a bit of string in his hand. And it's obvious that when we look back and we translated it, and you could see he literally says to the others, he goes, wouldn't it be funny if I dressed him? He's saying dressed him like us. And he's actually saying, he's going, wouldn't it be funny if I did that? And then he goes, well, I'm going to do it. Let's see what he does. Yeah. So then so again, the joke was all on them. And he basically tied this bit of string on my penis. At which point, of course, crashing through the forest comes Steve and Dave, the cameraman, David. And Steve's like, kind of, what's going on here? Obviously, they start filming. And then, and we were in the forest. So I was like, he goes, what have they done? And I went, Steve, mate, they tied them to my penis. And he was like, show us. I was like, I'm not going to show you. Don't be ridiculous. But we end up, and it was only us. You know what I mean? I mean, I'm as naive as they are. You're like, oh, well, I'm sure they'll never use it. They couldn't use footage like this anyway. So anyway, so obviously Steve got all of that. And then there was this whole, once we got back, he's like, well, obviously I'm going to use it, Justin. Of course I am. What do you think I have? I'm a television player. It's the best thing that's happened in the entire series. So, but then so we, at the BBC, huge organisation, we have a team called editorial policy. So if, for example, you were to complain about a broadcast that I'd done, said that I'd said something wrong, the editorial, they're essentially kind of, you get sort of philosophers. They come in and they say, well, is it correct to say that, whatever I've said? So there was this question about, should they, about pixelation, right? So, when you blur the image, right? So obviously the audience on mainstream British television, and indeed it was shown around the world, so, can't see a naked man, right? Yeah. So you can't see. So they're going to pixelate me. Yep. But then the question is, what about but hold on, they're dressed.
But that's
in their mind, they're dressed.
Yeah.
So if we pixelate them, we're imposing our values on their society. We're sort of saying our cultural values trump their values. And there was apparently, they had this huge discussion about who should be pixelated. Should we all be pixelated? Should I not? I mean, if I'm dressed in their culture, then, if we're not pixelating them, well, why are we pixelating Justin? Because he's as dressed as they are. So, but anyway, in the end, they decided that our cultural values meant that I would be given the,
You'd be pixelated, but not them.
I'd be pixelated, but they wouldn't be, which I think was probably the right. I mean, look, I probably would have said you can't broadcast it had they not done that. But but yeah, it was just a really interesting. And again, it just shows the complexities of intercultural relationships, doesn't it? I mean, how do you represent their culture to the world, without imposing your kind of value judgments on it? I think we made the right call. I did get hideously teased by friends and colleagues about it afterwards.
Hey, we're just going to stop here for a quick ad break, but stick around. We'll be right back with more What It Was Like.
G'day, America. It's Tony and Ryan from the Tony and Ryan podcast from Down Under.
This episode is sponsored by Boost Mobile, the newest 5G network in the country.
These guys are no longer the prepaid wireless company you might remember. They've invested billions into building their own 5G towers across America, transforming the carrier into America's fourth major network alongside the other big dogs.
Yep, they're challenging the competitors by working harder and smarter, like this amazing new network they've literally built. They have blazing fast 5G and plans for all the latest devices. Visit your nearest Boost Mobile store or find them online at boostmobile.com.
Instacart is on a mission to have you not leave the couch this basketball season. Because between the pre-game rituals and the post-game interviews, it can be difficult to find time for everything else. So let Instacart take care of your game day snacks or weekly restocks and get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes. Because we hear it's bad luck to be hungry on game day. So download the Instacart app today and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 orders. Service fees apply for 3 orders in 14 days, excludes restaurants.
So it sounds like on the balance, it was kind of mostly the emotion was just a series of like funny sort of upbeat moments.
It was deeper than that because I felt a real sense of connection. I mean, I've been, for example, to Japan and found it quite hard because it's so kind of polite.
Very serious.
It's and it's kind of and respectful, you know, and you know, you're kind of forever thank you, and you know, and they were very relaxed. I mean, they felt culturally, they were very easy to get. They were really, I mean, you know, they were a really good laugh. You know, they were really good laugh, and I really felt it's not just that we were having fun. It was more that you just felt a kind of real human connection. You just thought, you know, these are really good people. I can really get on with them. There doesn't feel to be a huge cultural distance. I mean, there are people in Britain that I struggle to. I mean, they were really easy to get on with. You know, there are lots of people, you know, I've got colleagues who I find harder to deal with than these guys. So,
same.
So it was very kind of positive feeling of shared humanity, you know? It felt really, you know, and all of that kind of expectation that there'd be, you know, that it might be challenging or difficult or hard to understand them, or all of that fell away. And we just, you know, I think you know, when I went back, they were like, "Oh, it's you," you know. They remembered me, and I remembered them, and it was just felt like it felt like a really good cultural exchange that I felt that they'd really got something, and that, you know, we'd kind of had an insight into their lives as well. But as I say, not in that kind of white savior kind of thing that you sometimes get. I mean, it wasn't like, if anything, the wisdom went from them to me rather than the other way around.
What was the most profound kind of like, you know, universal human affirming moment that you had with them?
It was the little, you know, the profound human affirming stuff was the humor. It was the shared humor, the sort of, I mean, you know, it trivializes it a bit to say pratfalls, but it was their enjoyment of, you know, it's the stuff that you'd see in a silent movie, you know, like it's Mr. Bean. It's I mean, there's a reason why Mr. Bean, you know, is one of the, I mean, it was a huge success globally. It's because, you know, we all kind of get the humor. Some people would see it as a bit crude and simplistic, but it's humor that everybody can understand. You know, of sort of somebody with perhaps a slightly inflated view of themselves, you know, encountering difficulties in the world. And I think that's, you know, but there was a shared humor that just made you think, you know, we are all we're the same species struggling with the same issues. So there was a real profound sense of shared humanity, and that was the richest thing. And actually, you know, I mean, I'm sort of apologetic that it was the humour that was the real connection. But actually, think about the interactions that you have, Julian. Often it is the humour that breaks through and makes you think, actually, this guy's all right. This woman's, you know, really interesting, because they have a sense of humour that, you know, and humour connects us in a really profound way. And that was what really came through with our interactions.
I think nothing illustrates someone's humanity or their intelligence more than their humor. I think I always judge politicians, for example, harshly when they don't seem to have a sense of humor. I'm like, oh, I know for a fact that guy's a bit of a dick because he's got no sense of humor. Yeah. So, I mean, when I was sort of researching this topic before I found my way to you, it seems like there's a bit of controversy around like this idea that should we contact these tribes, or should we just leave them be, or should we just sort of fence off their area and pretend they don't exist and just like let them carry on their existence in the way that they've done for thousands of years. this notion seems controversial for reasons that I'm not totally across. I was wondering now, having met these people, do you have a position on this? What should be done?
Well, I would say, if in as much as we can, I would say we should, only make contact with people who want to make contact with us. We should respect the integrity of the land that they live in and allow them to, continue to live the way they do for as long as they want to. I feel that quite strongly. And I would like to be able to kind of reestablish the territorial, the reserve area that they've been designated by the Brazilian government and allow them to live there. Sadly, I think that won't happen. I think our, hunger for land and for, what the land can give us is so great that we will, it's going to be hard for us to curb our appetites. If you think about the US, Australia, UK, it's only when the wilderness is almost gone that people stop and say, hold on a second, we're losing something here.
We've got a similar thing here in Australia where when you get up in an airplane, you see just how little wilderness is left. It's really just mountains. If you get a mountain, all the pioneers sort of decided they didn't want to tear down the trees on a mountain. So mountainous areas became national parks, and everywhere else became beef country, really.
Yeah, like really extensive cattle farms, and that sadly is what's happening to the Amazon. It's turning into huge cattle farms, which, is so unproductive compared to the forest that it replaces.
Yeah. Having gone through this experience, having met these people, having seen the challenges facing them, would you describe yourself as an optimist or a pessimist?
Look, it's really hard. I'm not optimistic about their nature. They're really good people. And like I say, they have a kind of optimistic disposition. But I'm not optimistic that their lifestyle's gone. I talked about how the whole torch incident with Piraí, they were on the cusp of becoming a materialistic society then, 15 years ago. And now, I fear that if I went back, when I went back to the community 4 years later, they were living in houses and had property. So that was over. So their traditional way of life, frankly, has gone. I wonder if that little community I talked about, which they said was still in the forest, they might still be out there. Although, it's a long time, 15 years, and a lot's changed. So their lifestyle is over. So you can't really be optimistic about the hour. And, I think, all the more reason why we should do what we can to allow the people who remain in traditional tribal communities to make their own decisions about their future. I think the problem here is that if you're a tribal person, it's a hard life. You've got to move all the time. You create your own shelter. You've got to catch food to eat. You've got to pick berries. They aren't nutritious. The sort of fruit and food that we eat has been engineered by plant breeders over millennia, thousands of years. So the apples are huge and sweet, and the grapes are massive and delicious. Those aren't what wild fruits are like. Wild fruits, anyone who's been into anywhere remotely wild knows that a wild apple is a tiny little thing, and it's probably quite sour. You need to eat 10 of them, and you probably get a bit of a stomachache afterwards to get any nutrition at all. That's the environment they're living in. And if suddenly you see a world in which you can go to a store and buy a delicious burger, it's going to be, which way do I go? You spend hours and days making your own clothes, or get a hand-me-down T-shirt that somebody gave to charity for free. You're going to wear the T-shirt, and it's just the allure, the attractions of our material society are so strong that you'd have to have the constitution of an ox, to resist the temptations of the so much easier life that modern civilization offers. And so I think we're inevitably fighting a losing battle. And I can be optimistic about the individuals, being happy people enjoying their lives. I think that is possible, but the long-term viability of the kind of tribal community as a unit of human society, I think, is kind of in the long term challenging, which is not to say that I don't think we should make every effort to allow people to continue to do it, as I've said, but I think it's hard to be optimistic about that.
Yeah. Well said. I completely agree with you. I also think it's we're lucky. We live in a very interesting time where, 2025, it feels like we're living in the future, and yet we are still witnessing just the last little tiny remnants of a pre-colonial world, and we're seeing we get to see it. In 100 years, I don't think it'll be around anymore. It'll be like fairy tales, sort of mythology from the past. So you got to go there and go and have a look at it. I think that's really remarkable.
Yeah, it's an incredible privilege, and to have been back, it's really nice to have stayed in contact with them over the years, because it means, what could have been a kind of quite superficial experience, I feel that I've deepened it by going back to them and kind of keeping an eye on them, and even just raising their issue with the Brazilian government, to say, look, we're still interested, we'd like to go and see them, because we have to get permission. You're not allowed to visit tribal communities without permission. So even doing that raises their profile within the Brazilian kind of authorities. So hopefully, it makes a bit of a difference. Not much, but a bit. But no, I mean, it's been an amazing thing to have had over the course of my life, this relationship with this community, thousands of miles away. I was going to say deep in the forest. The sad thing is they're not deep in the forest anymore, but still living in a scrap of forest in a
on the fringe of some cattle ranches.
Yeah.
Well, Justin, this has been amazing. So thank you so much for making the time and talking me through it.
Brilliant. Cheers, Julian. No, it was great to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Today's episode was produced by Rachel Tuffery. It was mixed by Jimmy Saunders, who also did our theme music. A big thanks to our interns, Nina Fussell and Ellie Dickey. And this whole thing has been a Super Real production.
Come on down to Boost Mobile and turn your tax refund into 6 months of savings?
Nope, all wrong. You're on the radio touting Boost Mobile's 5G network. You gotta use your radio voice, like this. Come on down to Boost Mobile and get 6 months free when you buy 6 months on our best unlimited plans. Now you go.
This is just how my voice sounds.
Just say it like you mean it.
Okay.
Plus, enter to win up to $10,000 and double your tax refund.
Oh, my.
Requires upfront payment. Taxes and fees extra. Terms and exclusions apply. Visit boostmobile.com for full offer terms and sweeps details.